I said, the precinct delegates, there's a lot of things that you will vote on in state conventions. One of them is the University of Michigan Board of Regent candidates. We have 4 people running for 2 spots that we nominate at the August convention. One of those candidates is here with us tonight. He was a 4th generation U of M student, if I'm not mistaken. And he was also an Inaflex student. So if you know anything about Ann Arbor, that means they're really, really smart. He's run before for the U of M Board of Regents, and he ran for the U.S. House in 2010, the year of the Tea Party, against, I think it was John Dingell. Yeah. Ladies and gentlemen, Dr. Rob Steele.
Thanks so much. Appreciate everybody coming out. Thanks, Dennis and Chris, who do a great job, and this is known to be an energetic group who gets out there. How many precinct delegates are there here now? Okay, great. So you guys understand what's going on. Thank you then, delegates, for the last convention. I was by far and away the top vote getter among the people running for Regent. Last time I was also the top vote getter in the general election for Regent on the Republican side, but of course in Obama's landslide, we need a lot of help down at the bottom of the ticket. In fact, the top of the ticket is important, whether you're excited about the top of the ticket or the various seats. These state board education seats are incredibly important, and we'll cover a little bit about that. So one of the things that I talked about in the last campaign is this massive infusion of money the university has gotten over the decades from the taxpayers via the state appropriation. It's billions and billions and billions of dollars. The administration at the university has parlayed that through a lot of hard work and a lot of dedicated people into a massive endowment of over $8 billion with another huge fundraising thing going on now. And because of this massive investment by the state taxpayers, my last campaign, a couple of my key points were that every qualified student from the state of Michigan should be accepted before any out-of-state student. That's a no-brainer. Everybody campaigns on that now. There's no question about it. And out-of-state students should be accepted before foreign students. Okay? And so those were kind of some simple ones that I talked about last time. Another key one I talked about, which is now being discussed a fair amount with different twists, but one of the key ones was that students should have to read the founding documents prior to graduation from the University of Michigan, including the Declaration, Constitution, Federalist, and Anti-Federalist papers. And I'm not necessarily one to say they need a class, because a class is determined by who's teaching it. And you can take a liberal professor and have him teach the Constitution and have nobody know what's going on. I think the critical thing in my point there is that they need to see the words on the paper for themselves and understand what they mean. And there was an interesting story from a George Mason professor at the law school there, where their law students are required to read the Federalist Papers, and their students would come up after that and say, man, that was the hardest course I've ever had in college. And a professor would answer, well, of course it was. It was written for the average upstate New York farmer in 1787. So, we need to focus on this higher education stuff. And now, the other thing about this endowment and all this taxpayer appropriations that has been parlayed very nicely, and let me say, in fact, my grandmother graduated from the university in 1924 and was chair of the continuing education for women in the 1950s, and was actually a national co-chair for the very first endowment campaign at the University of Michigan in 1964, which blew away its expectations. But another key point that I made last time is that if you graduate from the university with a so-called STEM degree, science, technology, in math, engineering and math, the university should encourage those people to stay in the state by giving them a tuition refund if they stay in the state for 5 years, whether they're in-state or out-of-state. I mean, there's no way to get an out-of-state student to stay in the state with these degrees better than helping to refund their incredibly sky-high state tuition. So, that's another way that the taxpayers can get the benefit from having the university foster these bright people to stay in the state of Michigan. Another one from the last campaign was this idea is that obviously the debt's high and all this kind of stuff. And if anybody knows anything about finance, I was chair of the finance committee for a $40 million corporation for a decade, is that fixed capital costs and depreciation, all these various things that go on in large companies, you don't see other companies close down for 3 to 4 months out of the year. And we have a university, a massive university, $7 billion fixed capital costs that don't do anything, or very little, in the summer. So I also proposed that if you go to use those summer, spring, and summer terms, and you graduate early, you should get that tuition refunded as well. We need to fill up those buildings, get the value out of those buildings that are sitting there the whole time. So that was some of my stuff from the last time. Obviously, I've got some new ones. And, a couple of the key ones are the concept, when you go out and buy a car, and you start to buy this car, let's say you're paying for it by a loan or whatever, or you're paying as you go. I mean, they don't charge you more and more as you go, right? I mean, if you're going to the University of Michigan, you're going to get a bachelor's degree, you should know how much that's going to cost you the day you enroll. You shouldn't have to wonder if it's going to go up year after year after year. It should be a fixed cost deal. And if they don't get you done in 4 years, it's on the university if you're the student meeting your benchmarks. And so there needs to be a fixed cost situation there for those. And another key one, I mean, this group, more than most groups, clearly understands that knowledge is power, right? And those with the power don't want you to have the knowledge. And that's why one of the first key things that I'll propose is that the entire University of Michigan checkbook go online with complete 100% transparency. So when you want to go online and see where that money's being spent, you can go online and see where it's being spent. And you will be amazed at where that money is being spent. The University of Michigan is often used as an example in the higher education literature as administration gone amok. They're frequently used as the example of how the rate of growth in their administration. And of course, a lot of this is from federal, things that, mandates and that sort of thing, which let me just throw out there, Common Core, which is a K-12 thing. You can count on me to fight against any moving up in the education system for that. But I would say probably the key thing that I think has been developing very rapidly and is critically important is that there should be no student, in-state or out-of-state, that when they enroll at the university, in a public university, that they should lose their constitutional rights. They should not lose their free speech rights. They should not lose their religious rights, their rights to defend themselves. We have speech codes, harassment codes, all kinds of things that are absolutely run amok with a situation where there is no due process, and people are there was actually, many of you probably read recently, on Constitutional Day last September, there was a student actually pulled in by the administration for doing what? Handing out constitutions on campus on Constitution Day. He wasn't in a free speech zone. You should not lose your constitutional rights when you step onto campus. And one of the things I talked about last time, and wrapping up now, which I think is perhaps even more important than anything else that I've talked about, is that University of Michigan regents are elected by the taxpayers in a statewide and by the voters in a statewide election, no different than Secretary of State or Attorney General. And we need regents that are going to go there and represent the voters to the university, and not the university to big corporations and out-of-state interests. We need people who are going to take their role seriously, having been put there by the state. And so in helping to accomplish that, I'm committed to having open office hours every month in a different congressional district, moving around the state, making contact with people in all these districts, and even more importantly, we can't just sit there and talk to ourselves. We have to call, as a regent, you shouldn't be representing the Republican precinct delegates, you need to be representing all of them. And unless we come to grips with the fact that we're not in Oklahoma or Kansas, and that our state tends to be a difficult one to win, a Republican, we need to get people out there to understand that we are actually on their side, and that with us at the helm, they will do much better. So office hours around the state, and then also open office hours in Ann Arbor that are open for anybody that wants to come in and do that kind of a thing. This group, more than most, understand this concept that we're not Kansas or Oklahoma. And Ronald Reagan, who of course after he was president talked in a very detailed way about how true conservatives and the true conservative Republicans were closer to libertarians than anything else, by the way. That was Reagan's thought. We need everybody. When we get passed into the general election, the Reagan rule applies. Thou shalt not speak ill of the general election candidate. Go out there, work hard in the primary or whatever it is that you're doing, and make your points. But when it comes time, the state of Michigan needs everybody to turn out and go vote up and down the ticket if our kids and grandkids, expect to have any chance. So, I'm done. I don't know if there's questions or if I'm racing off or what's up. I have a sign-up sheet in the back there if you want to get your name on my emails. In fact, I've only sent out one email, so you're not going to get a million of them. Yeah.
The cost of college education has outstripped inflation by about double in the last, 10, 20 years. And so now we have a generation of students that are basically graduating with a home mortgage without the home. and it's directly attributable to loans available from the federal government. What can we do about this to control the cost of a college education?
Well, I would say that he is not a plant, but somehow I missed what I thought was my best idea last time. And I agree with you on that. The only thing that has outstripped the rising cost of medical care is the cost of higher education. And so what I had proposed last time is that the non-restricted portions of the endowment be used for student loans and no federal money be used for student loans. And what this would do is finally align the interests of the university with their student and with the outcome of the education they get. If the university wants to loan their endowment out, the non-restricted portions, to a student, and have 10 people graduate with a certain degree where there's only 2 jobs, put that on the university, not on the taxpayers. And I think between that and this transparency, you will see a very direct, effect on costs and so forth. Because, I can tell you, living in the Ann Arbor area, it's not so relevant to this group, but when I talk to people in Ann Arbor, one of the key things I talk about is this, university, they don't pay any property tax. And they are constantly buying up huge sections of Ann Arbor, and they don't have to follow any of the rules either. When they build a big building, they don't have to follow the codes, they don't have to have approval for building permits, they are on their own. And so it's critical that people understand the regents, not the legislature, are in charge of the university. The university is responsive only to the regents. The legislators can choose to give an appropriation or not, but they can't put any strings on the appropriation. They can't tell them to do this or do that. That is up to the regents. It's a critical position that has been very underappreciated and underused.
Wouldn't college education, if it was in the free market, wouldn't it be moving to the internet rather than building big buildings that cost a lot of money?
Really, this guy is not a plant. But when in our interview with the Senate Faculty Forum last time, when all the candidates were in the Senate Faculty Forum, a candidate situation, and the Senate faculty, of course, at the university would not be noted to be conservative, right? And so I was up there with all the the Democrats running and so forth, and one of the questions was, what do you think the most important thing is going to be facing the regents? And all the Democrats said picking the president, because they want to get their hooks into the typical first word out of their mouth, diversity. And I said, well, that's important. But the regents control the president. If they're doing a good job, they have to follow what the regent wants, because that's who the president reports to. What I said was the most important thing is how higher education deals with the massive dislocation in education that's going to happen as we move into things like variations of the Khan Academy and accreditation and certificates and these kinds of things. Now, frankly, at the University of Michigan, with their endowment and with their type of education where they have high demand, where they turn away a lot of people, and they have a lot of laboratory type learning where people need to be physically in place, the university is going to survive that well. They're already working very hard on a thing called COSURA with Stanford and Penn and a lot of other real high-flying universities doing that exact same kind of thing. But I will tell you, the places like Eastern, Western, and Central that you see advertising, they're going to get hammered because of this cost and internet stuff. And you are going to see massive battles in the state legislature when the state reps and the state senators and the unions and the employee groups who are making their money by being in public education at universities that are going to be completely upside down. That's where that battle's going to head. But those places are going to be a disaster. Yeah.
Dr. Steele, can you tell me a little bit about the effect of Obamacare on the students and also on the university in relation to taxpayers' money going to that university, the negative impacts of Obamacare, possibly what some of the battles that can be had to fight against that at the state level?
Well, the university doesn't look at it as a negative. The university was a strong proponent, basically, of Obamacare, and a lot of people refer to the University of Michigan as a hospital with a football team attached to it. The hospital and the medical center generates more than half of the revenue by far at the university than the rest of the university. And hospitals, I've got, I'll come back another time and give you a healthcare talk on how healthcare financing actually works. But all the hospitals wanted Medicaid expansion. They all want the Affordable Care Act because in the end, they're the ones going to collect the money. And that's why you see small hospitals going away, just closing and being bought up by these things. We just saw the University buy Allegiance and Foot Hospital in Jackson. And so, something like I don't know the exact number. Approximately half the hospitals in Michigan have gone away in the last 30 years because the small ones are being bought out by the big ones, because the big ones, just like all crony corporatists, they want high bar for regulation so the little ones can't compete and they can't do it. So they have to fold and be bought for pennies on the dollars by the big one. It applies to energy, it applies to the hospitals, it applies to higher education. And I got a whole riff on accreditation for higher education too, but they want it. Students, not so much a benefit. They get to stay on their parents for 26, which of course the cradle to gravers, Life of Julia, think is a good thing. They just wanted to protect them from the high cost, in the big giant increase in the premium, until after they were 26 and theoretically had a job, but that's not going to do it. Yeah, I got it.
You spoke about self-defense on campus earlier. Have there been any issues on open carry on campus with the Board of Regents?
Well, obviously I didn't refer to that directly, but you did hear me say about the right to self-defense, and I would absolutely support the proper training. In fact, Senator Mike Green proposed, and passed in the Senate and the House, then vetoed by the governor, a proposal that if you had the appropriate training that you could carry on campus. And that was vetoed. I would support that. I want Senator Green to do that again. I will vote for it. I will promote it. Open carry, which is obviously legal anywhere in the state of Michigan, but it's not legal, according to state law, to have guns unless you're, have special certification, retired, law.
Well, the state police, their interpretation of law is if you have a CPL, you can open carry practically anywhere in the state except casinos.
Well, you don't need a CPL to open carry. Anyone can open carry. There is no law prohibiting open carry in the state of Michigan. Anyone without training, you can carry open.
Well, there's some debate about that because there are certain pistol-free zones in the state.
Oh, well, yeah, no, there are laws, there's primary alcohol serving, 2,500 entertainment, public schools, hospitals. Yeah, no, that applies to open carry as well. But you don't need a CPL or any training for open carry in the state of Michigan.
The issue was that the state police have said that if you have a CPL, you can't open carry in pistol-free zones as long as it's not in a casino.
Okay. Yeah, that I didn't know. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Rob, just a quick question. Maybe we'll wrap up with this, but we have a new president now, and do you have any insight as to the processes, how they went through that, and your thoughts on the new president?
Well, I mean, one thing I'm excited to see about the new president is he graduated from medical school and has a PhD both from Johns Hopkins, and the University of Michigan is the first or second largest to Johns Hopkins in federal research money every year. And so that is clearly the future of the university and how it survives. So in a general way, I'm supportive of that. I think it's great. What I'm not entirely crazy about, and I haven't met him, I haven't spoken with him personally, but I had a bunch of bets made with various people for various amounts at how many times the word diversity would be in his opening statement. Right? It was there. So he also came from Brown, which raises some interesting issues where there's no grades, there's no scores. It's kind of a very different Ivy League sort of place. But I'm excited, to have a guy who's a scientist, a hardcore scientist. Mary Sue also had a PhD in biochemistry, but this guy was the head of molecular biology at Berkeley, UC Berkeley as well. So he's a bona fide scientist who's done the administrative as well as the science, and so I think that's great for the university. But I think we need strong regents to make sure that Prop 2 is followed, to make sure that the president's not out there saying we're going to try to spend money, from the taxpayers to overturn the will of the people at the ballot box. I'll definitely do that. Yeah, or whatever.
David, why don't you go ahead and ask?
I've heard recently that student professors, there was a push to make them into unions, so that their tuition they were getting from working as student professors were paid into union dues. Have you heard anything about that?
Well, sure. Melinda Day, who actually I worked with her on this, she was a big part of my congressional campaign, and the whole freedom to work, and she was one that challenged through Mackinac Center this idea of paying unions to the the teaching assistants and grad assistants, and she was one. In fact, that issue has been going on forever. I mean, in the mid-'70s when I was a student, they were battling over the TAs in the unions. And so what happened with the university is before the Freedom to Work law took effect, they extended a lot of their contracts up to 10 years. There were different ones that were extended different lengths of time, but they were all extended because obviously the union leaders were finally willing to sell out their employees, for different contracts just so they could get their dues. But let's be real. I'm not one of these guys that would complain about these places extending their contract necessarily. Well, let's be realistic of what also happened there. These places that extended their contracts, like the university, for example, got all kinds of concessions they had tried for decades to get, which they could not get. But the union leaders finally gave in to some of these concessions so they could collect their union dues. So in fact, the taxpayers won big for the most part on these extended contracts, even though we obviously would argue that those people lost their rights for 3 to 10 years, whatever the contracts were, to extend it. So those were extended.
Getting back to the president thing.
Yeah.
I realize we obviously they just hired one, but it's reasonable to expect that anyone that sits on an education board for an 8-year term will probably have to deal with a vacancy and in a search process and a hiring of a university president. You're there as a regent. It happens. You got a vacancy. You got to fill. What are the types of things you look for, would like to see in a university president?
Well, I think one of the critical things is that they're actually preparing the students to be citizens of the United States of America. And, they're public, in this case, public universities, and I think that's absolutely critical. And it kind of goes back to this concept of, reading the founding documents. And I told the guys at the university, I said, hey, if you don't want to do it, I've already talked with Larry Arndt, who's endorsed me, by the way, in Hillsdale, that he would say we could use his course. But I think, so that's critical. I think one of the most critical, and there's no question these positions in many ways aren't academic so much. There's $7 billion budgets. There's a huge amount of executive type functioning that goes on. But I think the key thing is that they want the students to be educated to become citizens of the United States, and that they're willing to listen to the regents and understand that they don't work for the unions, that they don't work for the big companies. I mean, there's this huge push at the university to have all this co-branded, not co-branded, but developed through venture capital and academic ideas and this kind of stuff. And so a guy like this president we have now with North Research Complex, it's this big empty research venture capital thing. So we need a guy like that. I would hope I get a chance to pick somebody, but I'll tell you, Mary Sue Coleman was there 12 years. It's been really, really rare that somebody's been there less than 8 years, unless under extraordinary circumstances where somebody had to quit for health and they come in for a few years, or they were interim and that kind of stuff.
Very good. How about a big round of applause for Dr. Robinson?